The Emperor protects. These words have been a battle cry of suicidal abandon across more battlefields than time itself cares to remember. It is more a declaration than a statement by the Imperium's many martyrs. Rarely, a display of courage by the truly faithful has been known to summon the hand of the Emperor himself, a miracle delivered to his most obeisant followers. Could the Legion of the Damned, angels wreathed in holy flame, be one such force, delivered by the God Emperor himself? Or are they something far more sinister? These mysteries and a great more besides will be examined now as we take a deep dive into the Legion of the Damned. Before we dive into this epic video, remember Titan Wargaming covers all new lore within 40k as it develops, so subscribing and enabling notifications is an excellent way to make sure this is delivered straight to your feed, ensuring you are always up to date with an in-depth coverage. I'd love if we could build a community of 8,000 subs by Christmas Day, so I'd appreciate if you could consider this if you are learning or being entertained by our content. The ghostly apparitions collectively known as the Legion of the Damned are said to materialise in mankind's greatest hours of need, though this isn't necessarily true. If you wish to learn more, delving into the many secrets of the Legion as they refer to themselves, then listen on. Save perhaps for the identity of the two missing Primarchs, the lore surrounding the Legion of the Damned is quite possibly Games Workshop's greatest secret. Join us now as we uncover all there is to know about their nature, personality and appearance, recruitment methods, their true identity and purpose, as well as combat styles and tactics. We'll then dive into some especially interesting Legion of the Damned lore, and lastly, how they could be reintroduced into the current era Indomitus, through lore as well as the tabletop game. This is going to be a deep, deep dive, guys, but don't hold your breath. The most unsettling, unique trait the Legion possess is their supernatural nature. While this is plainly obvious, the depths of horror pervading these warriors cannot be overstated. For to merely look upon the unhelmed, ghostly visage of the damned brother will turn your blood to ice and stop your heart from beating forevermore. These Astartes, already terrifying in aspect, broadcast a palpable wave of fear into those around them, with the effect on individuals differing depending on their spiritual purity and true loyalties. For instance, a devout follower of the Imperial Creed, when catching sight of a Marine of the Legion, will still be completely overwhelmed by an unease and nervousness, but they will generally not be crippled by dread, as an enemy of the Imperium would be. This has been shown to be true within numerous Legion of the Damned stories, such as Animus Malorum. This ability to intimidate their enemies on an extreme level holds true of being one of the Legion's primary weapons. By piercing mental barriers established by psycho-indoctrination, and even biological ones, any who dare stand before the Legion of the Damned will only do so for a short time before becoming so fearful of their impending demise that in an effort to stave off their doom, the enemy often retreats, only to be easily run to ground. This impending doom broadcast by Legion members is only increased by the sight of them, as most if not all who bear knowledge pertaining to the Legion of the Damned already know. Each Astartes is adorned in depictions of mortality. Bones as well as flame motifs decorate their black ceramite plate, whilst a spectral fire coils around all Legion members to make them seem as if the Astartes have strode forth from some hellish purgatory into open battle, perhaps signifying the trueness of death, that all will eventually meet an end to decay into little more than osseous matter. This stark display, which, truth be told, any are rarely comfortable to face, paired with the hellish fires of purgatory raising from their armour, only work to further the sense of imminent death and harsh judgment the Legion are all too ready to deliver. It is known that to look into the eye lenses of a Legion of the Damned Astartes is to experience two red-hot coals scrutinise the contents of your very soul within an instant, rendering silent judgment under that baleful gaze, and often finding you wanting. What little Imperial scholars truly understand regarding the nature of the Legion is all too obvious when considering the etheric way they are. For how can one truly claim to comprehend the nature of a thing which seems to exist within reality and the immaterium simultaneously? You see, during battle, eyewitness accounts and fragmented vidlog footage show legionaries emerging from spectral fog, blinking in and out of existence, all the while closing distance with the enemy without actually seeming to move. It is unclear whether the unnatural fog which seems to encapsulate Legion members is responsible for this, or whether their spectral movement is yet another trait owing to their ghostly nature. They are known to stride through torrents of enemy fire, including armour-piercing shells, without so much as a glint of bare ceramite shining through that dark plate. For some, the weapons of enemies have been witnessed as passing straight through a legionary, the Astartes returning fire or downward thrust of a ceramite-coated fist, not proving as ineffective. But what may surprise some of you is that despite the Legion's almost autonomous nature, its members are not lacking in personality. You see, whilst the Emperor's enemies are cut down with no remorse, and even the faithful judged under their gaze by a standard that is extreme in the least, the Legion does fight with the traditional hate for the Xenos and the heretic at their core, whilst granting the Emperor's mercy to those faithful who are deserving. There exist two stories in particular which convey the Legion's modus operandi perfectly, whilst unveiling some of the most insightful lore of the Legion we have ever received. These are the stories Votum Infernus and Animus Malorum. Within Votum Infernus, we are dropped head first into a callous Drukhari bloodsport. A squad of Vostroyan guardsmen is set loose within an arena for their cruel audience delight. Before long, one solitary soldier is all that remains, prayers and benedictions passing his lips as he scrambles for the perceived safety of a ruined bunker. It is at this time a spectral legion of the damned Astartes appears, dispatching two witches by hand before numerous battle brothers appear to finish off the Drukhari Okon and its guards. Once his saviours disappear, the Vostroyan laments, for he knows that even were he to end his own life now, his cruel masters would simply resurrect him for further entertainment and torture. It is at this time the Marine from earlier appears once more, stating to the man, "Only in death," as he touches the guardsman, burning him to ash, forever relieved of the Xenos' violent attention. Mind you, the location of this game was within a Drukhari sub-reality. It seems the Legion's ability to travel across space branches into the Empyrean itself. Why would these legionaries appear at this time? Well, it wasn't because of the Vostroyan's faith, or even that he was in need. We'll get into that later in the video, but trust me when I say, it is very much worth the wait. But I'll warn you, it's quite the deep, winding tunnel of mysterious lore. On the other hand, compared to this short tale of mercy, another wholly ghastly experience has been had by otherwise loyal Astartes. Within the story Animus Malorum, the only named character to ever be identified within the ranks of the Legion of the Damned would appear at the head of a sizable Legion force, seemingly coming to the aid of a beleaguered Astartes detachment on the brink of annihilation. Their valiant fight to hold back tides of greenskins from overrunning a Basilica precinct, all but lost. Numbering only a handful of Astartes, the captain in command bore wounds which should have felled him, though his faith and bravery spurred him to defiance in the face of the Orc horde. To ensure the sacred relics and records beneath the church precinct were not defiled by the foul Xenos armies, Captain Orices has dispatched his tech marine to rig charges throughout the Basilicai's cavernous depths. As the Astartes were overrun, the tech marine was to trigger the charges, destroying the holy objects and taking as many foul greenskins with them as possible. However, before this mighty feat of defiance could be enacted, the Legion of the Damned would announce their presence with bolter fire and chainsword. Marching down from the steps of a distant basilica opposite the beleaguered Astartes lines, the ferocity exhibited by the Legion as they waded into waves of greenskin warriors, paired with the dreadful, morale-sapping effect the Legion of the Damned bear, would rout the greenskin horde, rescuing the handful of surviving Astartes, and thus stopping them from destroying the relics within the cavernous depths of the Basilicae. There are 5 interesting events within this tale, all of which help to build the nature and personality of the Legion's brothers. We will speak about 2 of them now, but again, you will need to wait for later in the video to hear the remaining facts, including how the Legion recruits. Intriguingly, this is the only instance of a ranked Astartes appearing within the Legion, for as far as the Legion of the Damned are concerned, all brothers are equal in death, their cadaverous armour unadorned of company or rank insignia. Nonetheless, unhelmeted, Brother Sergeant Attica Centurius has appeared briefly within Legion of the Damned rules, but within lore has only been mentioned within this story. Within the tale Animus Malorum, Brother Sergeant Centurius attends the captain of the beleaguered Astartes as he awakes in an infirmary bed. By the captain's bedside he appears ghoul-like, bearing sallow, pale features. The very sight of an unhelmed Centurius is enough to disgust, if not unnerve, even the most fervent of the Emperor's followers. He does not seem to speak in any conventional way, perhaps telepathically, or by some other means. What I found very interesting about this interaction is that Sergeant Centurius himself, when in conversation with the captain and tech marine, claims he had been sent to ensure the Basilicae did not fall. This means that even though Centurius appears as the only named character within the Legion, also the only brother to bear his name upon his pauldron, he is not the Legion's ultimate commander. We'll consider this fact more in a few minutes' time. It also appears that the Legion did not simply materialise to aid Captain Orices and his forces, but rather to save their most precious relic, and thereby also their means of recruitment, from destruction. You see, Centurius claims that in years long past, the planet on which they now fought was of great importance. Over time, as is the case with many aspects of the Imperium within 40k, the significance of the planet was forgotten, as were its secrets. By intervening within this conflict, the Legion of the Damned were able to save this relic, called the Animus Malorum, before the Tech Marine's charges engulfed it in explosive flame. So now, leading forward when the Legion's lore hopefully does become more established, Centurius bears their most holy relic, having rescued it from a fiery fate. We will discuss the Animus Malorum in more detail and how it relates to the Legion of the Damned's recruitment practices. Now admittedly, we are only ever shown one single instance of recruitment into the Legion of the Damned, and it is poor valiant Captain Orices who this dubious honour is bestowed upon. The ghoul at the end of his bed, as Captain Orices describes Centurius, has stayed behind upon the world to speak with the captain. When Orices asks what they want, Centurius opens a box containing the Legion's most sacred relic, the Animus Malorum, and Captain Orices was seemingly almost entranced by it. The Animus Malorum is the polished skull of a space marine, bearing 3 service studs embedded in the left brow. Orices could feel time stretch in all directions as the lifeless skull's sockets bore into his own. Feeling as though they did not want to listen to Centurius' words, but unable to stop the Legionnaire, it was explained to Orices that the Imperium at large owed a great debt to the Legion of the Damned. They had supposedly watched over the galaxy and mankind since time immemorial. They had formed an impenetrable barrier through which the foes of humanity could never pierce. Though ultimately the tally did forever rise, the Legion requiring souls so they could fulfill this greater purpose. Though ultimately the tally did forever rise, the Legion required souls so they could fulfill this greater purpose. "We would have you, Captain Erisses," Centurius explained. "We would claim you as a worthy member of the Legion. You were ready to give your life in defense of this world, and even in death, to deny it to the foe. From the bones of your noble kind were the foundations of the Imperium once built. Where you lead, others follow without question. As a martyr you would be wasted. As a legionnaire, you will be eternal." With Centurius' closing words, Erisses stared into the depths of the Animus Malorum. Here he bore witness to the true nature of the relic, as well as the Legion itself, and it is said he would have wept for all of them, should he still have possessed the eyes, hearts, or even a soul of his own to do so. Captain Erisses had crossed into death, his soul commended to the Legion through the Animus Malorum. Now the part I find particularly interesting from this passage of the short story Animus Malorum is where it states a soul of his own. It is granted that Captain Erisses now serves as one of the Spectral Legion, though how much will is still his own. If his soul belongs to another, does this too rob him of his own self-will? Let me know your thoughts on this particular matter. Arguably the greatest mystery surrounding this spectral group of Astartes is their origin. Were they at some time in the last 10 millennia living, breathing Astartes who have since perished or become trapped between dimensions? Are they figments, demons of light and order who do battle at the behest of the Emperor of Mankind? Are they from an even darker future, sometime beyond the 41st or even 42nd millennia, having been trapped in warp transit and manifesting in this era within M41? The truth is, there are several contrary points established so far, sprinkled throughout lore involving the Legion. On one hand, when I was a child, I remember White Dwarf articles and short stories some 20 or so years ago, which almost outright claimed the Legion were the remainders of the lost Firehawk Space Marine chapter. On the other hand, in more recent stories, such as where we experience Captain Erisses' recruitment, it is safe to say that were the Firehawks the original Legion, then by now their numbers must be diluted with the additions of souls from various chapters and gene lines. But why do the Firehawks make for a compelling contender for the Legion's origin? Well, besides there being very little lore about the Legion when those specific stories were put to print, there exists on one hand several common traits between the two, which could be seen as vestigial habits or practices passed on from the Firehawks into their current state of spectral existence, and on the other hand, traits belonging to the Firehawks which could perhaps explain why in death they serve in a purgatory-like condition. Firstly, more straightforward, are the similarities between the two. The Firehawks were said to persecute particularly vengeful campaigns, even by Astartes standards, against the Imperium's many enemies, be they traitor turncoat forces or foul Xenos witches, and the esteem in which they held the Imperial Creed was especially great, with the Zealous chapter taking notable part in wars of devotion, even when those battles were particularly self-destructive internal conflicts. Lastly, both are known to approach victory on the field of battle by conducting strikes of overwhelming force against the enemy's main line of advance. I'm sure you likely see the parallels given the wrathful, straightforward nature of the Legion, as well as their ghostly, almost holy nature. Conversely, and conceivably, the principal reasons the Legion of the Damned may not be a resurrected immortal Firehawks chapter is revealed to us within some of the most recent lore available. Besides the recruitment of Captain Erisses from a chapter who obviously are not the Firehawks, there have been instances of Legion Astartes perishing in battle, proving they are not immortal. For if the Legion were merely the revenant remnants of the Firehawks, given the millennia the Legion has been operating for, Surely all of these beings would have perished by now, though it is quite impossible to be certain. Within the story The Dark Hollows of Memory, in reply to a thin line of Legion brothers advancing upon their position, a traitor predator tank opens up with its las cannon, catching one of the damned neatly in the chest. What follows is an explosion so bright, mortals nearby cannot bear to witness it. Then, his flame burnt bright as he took one last step before falling to the ground, still, all ghostly flames now doused. Now, if this was a true death experience, this Astartes' long service finally come to an end, then it seems nothing short of a las cannon is capable of one-shotting a Legion brother. Of course, there are myriad weapons between the damage or power level of bolt guns and las cannons, though this is interesting nonetheless. Something we need to keep in mind regarding this seeming final death, however, is that we do not know whether felled Legion brothers are capable of resurrecting. With the Necron's ability to phase back to tomb complexes following their destruction, or the Eldari's use of soul stones, I wonder if the Legion of the Damned Marine's soul is simply returned to the warp to be reborn once more within some especially holy place, known only to the Legion. Now, Firehawks aside, there is the possibility that the Legion of the Damned are vengeful Astartes who have perished, their souls not knowing rest, still haunting the material realm in service to the Emperor of mankind himself. And, whilst this could very well become the case when Games Workshop chooses to explore the Legion more deeply, I can't help but feel that particular explanation contradicts the modus operandi of the Emperor, as we've experienced him during both the Heresy novels as well as his most recent lore from the Dark Imperium onwards. One important fact which should be noted in relation to the appearance of the Legion is that during the majority of their manifestations, they have fought in defense of a holy site or relic. Of course, there are instances wherein their own inexplicable goals have been at the forefront of the Legion's motivations, such as in the stories Votum in Furnace, Remorseless, Animus Malorum, and perhaps the Dark Hollows of Memory. In the tale Votum in Furnace, that reason for the Legion's true appearance we teased towards the beginning of the video was in fact due to the final resting place of that spectral legionnaire who slew the Drakari witches. You see, when finally the Xenos were slain, the Vestroyan trooper, before his mercy immolation at the hands of the Legion, inspected the ruins he had been trying to reach during the murderous blood match. It seems the Drakari games master responsible for staging this sport was not aware of the true contents of that ruin, for within the son of Vestroya found a reliquary, encased within the remains of the spectral marine who had come to his aid. This was the final resting place of the Astartes who would go on to join the Legion of the Damned. But even as this realization dawned, the reliquary and indeed the ruined tower itself began to fade from existence. So we learn it was not simply the devotion displayed by the loyal guardsmen which called to the Legion, but rather it was either a happenstance that the guardsmen were present at the time of their arrival, or some other predestined meeting that seems to occur occasionally when the Legion become involved in mortal matters. Within the tale Remorseless, we experience a siege between the Iron Warriors and their associated allies against the Imperial Fists who were defending the city of Coromond upon an Imperial Shrine World. Of course, if ever the Legion were to materialize, then it would be in a holy city upon a Shrine World, right? But what we experience in this story, if anything, generates more questions than it does answer any lore musings. Intriguingly, this story actually revolves around the final experiences of one of Fabius Bile's Glandhounds, who is owned by a particular marine of the Iron Warriors Legion. For those unaware, Glandhounds are genetically enhanced humans who work in packs to bring down space marines to ultimately harvest their valued progenoid glands, hence the name. They are arguably one of Fabius Bile's most effective creations. Within this tale, a lone Glandhound stalks an Imperial Fist Marine, whilst his two packmates are elsewhere doing the same. Not the intended way for Glandhounds to hunt, However, it is stated their numbers had dwindled significantly over the course of various campaigns. Now, whilst the Legion stalk the corrupted mortal, they do not interject when he is combating the Imperial Fist, not even when he finally dispatches the Loyalist Marine. With the Marine's progenoid gland harvested and stored in a bandolier upon the Glandhound's chest, it is not until a corrupted guardsman loots a small hip-mounted reliquary upon the Imperial Fist that the Legion materialise in earnest. Even as the mortal wrestled open the small wooden box, it is as if a cold, warping sensation settles upon all present, a spectral smoke sinking around them. When the reliquary's latch is pried open, revealed within is a clenched skeletal fist complete with scrimshawed detail, as the Imperial Fists are known to do. As the ignorant trooper throws the remains over his shoulder, the ancient relic never makes contact with the ground, the Legion appearing at this moment to rescue the object of their attention. Out of the smoke, a black armoured hand springs forth to encapsulate the raider's skull, its armoured digits piercing the bones of the man's crown, while simultaneously lifting the wretch from the ground. Could it be this particular legionary has taken offence to the way the man so disrespectfully handled the remains? The Legion would pursue the Glandhound, not one falling to his trickery, striding through entire bandoliers of grenade blasts, as if they were no more destructive than the breeze upon the battlefield. Realising the ghostly apparitions in fact were urging him to hand over his prized progenoid gland, the Glandhound attempted to flee back towards the Iron Warrior's main entrenchment beyond the city's limits. Pursued by a vast number of the Legion, the Glandhound loped through blasted ruin and slabs of broken rockcrete, doing his best to move swiftly through the shattered remnants of the Shrine City. All the while over the Vox, his pursuers as a whole seemed to whisper to him, "Are you afraid of me?" Interestingly, he found he was. A Glandhound is a being who has been remade under the knife of one of the most maniacal though skilled biosurgeons within the galaxy. Fear is but an emotion for weaker creatures, all sense of it having been flensed from their soul by the butcher's blade down to the marrow. Though here right now, he was mortally afraid, scared he would not see out this pursuit. It seemed these ghosts wanted him to repent. They wanted the Hound to denounce the dark gods he served and to regret his actions under the powerful Iron Warrior Legion. They also seemed to want his gory prize. Of course, fleeing from spectral Astartes who no longer require power-armoured footfalls to move was always going to end in capture. The pursuit raged on, through bombardments of earth-shattering artillery rounds and buzzing shrapnel, but still he maintained only the slightest lead from the Astartes ghosts. They buzzed through his combead, piercing his mind, eventually breaking down the Glandhound's resistance and revealing to him what a fool he had been all these years. His gods were not powerful. He was not a superior being in any way. His reserves began to deplete rapidly as his will to press on in the name of his masters depleted and the constant pulsing of steroid enhancements within his system ran dry. As the Glandhound is finally cornered, a mass of black armoured bodies are suddenly pressing in on him from all sides, clogging the winding trench lines as this one scenario plays out in seeming isolation to the raging siege around them. One of the Marines seems to nurse the reliquary from earlier. It seems something that is precious to him. Overcome by dread, cornered like all those the Hound had slain in his own filthy service to the ruinous powers, he holds out the bandolier to the Legion, hoping at last they will simply take what they want and leave him be. But as all present lock eyes with the vial, the Hound, the press of black bodies, it is plain to see the progenoid gland is useless. It is a mess, pierced by shrapnel and any number of other impacts. What seems to be an audible sigh falls over all those legionaries present, and at once the Glandhound knows this will not be over quickly. White-hot static sears the man's brain, as a thick press of bodies go about their grisly work. He'd had the chance to repent. He did not, and so his death would not be swift. This is the only excerpt of lore detailing the Legion wanting to obtain viable, healthy progenoid glands. Earlier in the story, the Glandhound witnessed the legionaries carrying the bandoliers and severed heads of the other two of his kind. They'd kept the progenoid glands they collected also. But what use could they have for such things? We know the Animus Malorum recruits the souls of worthy Astartes to fight within the Legion, but we'll revisit this point further in the video. Finally, do you think the reliquary containing the Imperial Fist Scrimshawed hand was in fact the remains of that legionary? This story was very intriguing. Now, further to our point regarding the Legion acting in their own best interest rather than the misconceived notion of selflessly materializing to defend sites of holy significance, our previous tale of Captain Orisi's recruitment was but the precursor to a far darker ritual carried out by the Legion of the Damned. You see, following the death of the noble captain, the Legion members still present within the Imperial Bastion at once simultaneously turned their weapons upon their erstwhile allies. Brother Marco, the tech marine from earlier, was at once shocked and confused. He ran out of the infirmary to witness his own men being engulfed in spectral flames, screaming as they perished. His vox was filled with the tormented screams of his brothers as the remaining Astartes were butchered by the remorseless Legion of the Damned. Strangely, drafted mortals nearby, though terrified and cowering in fear, were unharmed by the spectral flames burning so close to them. Yet mighty Astartes were felled, their eyes alight with a supernatural glow as they fell to their knees in death. Attempting to flee, Brother Tech Marine Marco was confronted by the haunting visage of Centurius. Raising the Animus Malorum in his gloved hand, the empty eye sockets of the long-felled Astartes glowed with an unnatural radiance. "Serve or die," Centurius commanded of Marco. "No," he retorted, attempting to loose his plasma pistol at Centurius, only for the bright shot to pass through the sergeant, impacting the wall beyond. "No," he cried again, "Orisi's did not speak for all of us in this." Centurius seemed to consider this for a moment, before unsheathing his chainsword. "Indeed, your captain would have given his life selflessly and unconditionally in the service of the Emperor. But your sacrifice was hollow, expected, commanded. For that, your soul is forfeit." Marco faltered, his vision swimming. The legionnaire was no more than a metre away from him. The debt is too great, and the tally is rising. With each passing decade, it is rising. A cold numbness crept into his fingers, and the pistol fell from his grip. He could hear nothing but his brother's death agonies over the vox-link, before it crackled into a frightful silence. "Not for you the immortal servitude of the Legion. You will pay what is owed." The abyss beckoned. Marco felt it gaping beneath him, shot through with the howling, tormented souls of all those who had been found wanting in their final moments of service to the Emperor. The Animus Malorum, it was all that he could see. Then Centurius touched the unearthly relic upon Marco's forehead, and the tech marine knew that he was undone. I find this passage from Animus Malorum especially interesting, for not only have the Legion rescued a beleaguered Imperial contingent, they have then harvested their souls to seemingly fuel their ongoing war efforts. But if Astartes the likes of Marco were not fit to serve the Legion in death, what becomes of them? Sergeant Centurius states that the debt is too great, and the tally is always rising. How do you believe this seeming soul harvest helps to account for a rising toll of the dead? Lastly, within the dark hollows of memory, the Legion materializes to combat a group of deranged traitor Astartes called the Company of Misery, who seek to pierce a mighty vault which inside houses one of the greatest catalogues of Imperial history in existence, a great librarium of Mnemosyne. It is at this time we experience the thoughts and even how the material realm appears to a damned legionary. Fog, always the fog, never ending, never clearing. It is the ghost of the world. Shapes of echoes form and dissolve. Everything passes. Time makes phantoms of the real. There is no permanence except war. It gives the enemy substance, a substance of treachery and corruption. It cannot be allowed to exist. The substance must be killed. The enemy made less than an echo. Erase him, scratch him from time. Fragile eddies in the fog. Dark grey in the lighter grey, the smudge of mortals. Ignore them. Seek the enemy. A billow in the fog, the wind of conflict, pushing towards the foe. There, ahead, the hard silhouette in crimson, the blood to be shed, the scar of the traitor in the grey, the coordination of the attack. Words are not necessary. Were they ever? That knowledge, irrelevant, is gone. Only the knowledge of war matters, the one permanence. Pull the trigger, shatter the outline, return all to the fog. So we see how the Legion experienced the world around them. Simultaneously, their thoughts seem to be in incorporeal state, obeying some deep-rooted predisposition to erase the red of the enemy from the greyness of their surrounding existence. Amid the tempest of battle in close proximity to the Great Librarium, there is a fierce firefight and close-quarter combat. We experience the following from the same Marines. Furnace of war, the fog of the world ablaze. So much treacherous red. The Emperor's foes fight back with their own anger. Hurl it back at them. Unleash the full scope of righteous wrath. This space, not just another interior that will pass into the fog. Long echoes here. The past refusing to vanish. Something is here. A memory. A record of a scar. A dream of what once was given a form that still lingers. It should not be here. Ignore it for now. Use the solidity of the past. Defeat the enemy's numbers. Grind him into the muck of oblivion. So here they could sense the presence of something especially sacred to the scribes who cared for the library. The Legion had to ignore it, given the fierce resistance of their opponents, the Company of Misery. Given the echo of the scar referred to by the legionary is a book within the depths of the library, could this be some ancient record of the heresy, or some other truth which has since been erased from the Imperium's records? We then actually experience the Chaos Lord best the Marine who seems to be leading the Legion of the Damned. The traitorous Astartes buries his chain blade deep within the breastplate of the Loyalist and is said to feel it pierce ceramite, black carapace, flesh, and at last bone. Believing he has found their weakness, the Chaos Lord retorts, "You are no phantom. You feel the truth of misery now, don't you?" But of course we know it isn't an easy matter to combat a legionary, let alone defeat them. Wounded by the Chaos Lord, the seeming lead Marine communicates with his brothers once more. Misery. Oh, my brothers, does the wretch think to teach us anything about pain? Anything about rage? Gather the fog, the devouring fog, the burning fog. Consume everything, take it all. Emperor, for you the gift of final wrath. The flames which always enshroud the legionaries burn brighter for one final moment around the wounded leader, before finally a bright nova engulfs the entire upper floor of the librarium, ending the threat posed by the Company of Misery. Afterwards, venturing down in the deeper levels of the librarium, the scribe seeks to check what seems to be the most important secret text located within the great librarium of Mnemosyne. However, arriving at the exact spot in just the one book's place is naught but cinder and ash. No damage is wrought to the holy text surrounding it. In this case, it does seem the Legion of the Damned materialized to ensure the Company of Misery did not pierce the vault into the deeper librarium. but they weren't exactly concerned with the lives of the surrounding civilians, not to any great extent, nor the cataloguing works present within the top floor of the library, generations worth of archiving, which referenced every item within the cavernous depths below. Just prior to the Legion making their presence known, the traitor Astartes brutally tortures several loyal followers of the Imperial Creed before exterminating hundreds of them with bolter rounds as they are pressed under the roof of a church, cowering in fear interrupted during worship. I suppose we can glean a couple of points from this story. One, that the Legion are not particularly concerned with saving the lives of mortals as often as possible, though they do at other times. It seems their beneficence does not extend to the degree of the Salamander chapter, for example. Secondly, the Marines of the Legion seem to be acting as parts to a greater whole, spots of semi-consciousness whose souls are commended to some greater power which holds true authority over their actions. I do wonder if the wounded Marine towards the end of the book, the one who seemed to be giving orders, was supposed to be Centurius, though it is never plainly stated whether this is the case. My guess would be not, seeing as he seems to give his life at the end of the story, bursting into a nova of light, similar to how the Marine fell by the Predator did before it collapsed in death. But then again, we never find out. Another mystery held by the Legion. Sadly, or rather more so typical of an Astartes host of spectral otherworldly beings, the Legion of the Damned have never once employed any greater tactics than overwhelming the enemy by way of sheer firepower and close-quarter violence, paired with their unnatural resilience to return harm. There are instances which slightly diverge from simply walking headlong into the enemy, such as during the 13th Black Crusade, wherein the Legion aided the Space Wolves in disabling Abaddon's Blackstone Fortress, or around the same year towards the supposed turn of the millennia, when they came to the aid of the Imperial fists aboard the Phalanx. Even during these battles there was no greater tactic or strategy, such as employing specialist troops for a specific task, utilising ordnance or vehicles, or communicating with their allies to form greater numbers in wider conflicts to come. It does seem that the greater will of an individual Legion is surpassed by a different consciousness which may even be the same one who controls where the Legion appear to do battle. When Brother Captain Orices is recruited by the Animus Malorum, he is said to no longer have a soul of his own. Likewise, when Centurius communicated through the Tech Marine Marco within the same story, he states he and his brother legionaries were sent. Given the Sergeant is the only Legion of the Damned Astartes we have seen bearing any rank or insignia, this begs the question whether there is a higher ranking legionary, or whether some other commands them, whether in the conventional sense, psychic, or even spiritual in its orders. In battle, the most common weapon used by the Legion are their bolters. The ammunition they project is said to be wreathed in flame, having different effects on their targets. Sometimes they burn any unfortunate they make contact with to ash, and other times they explode, more in line with a standard Astartes bolt round. They do of course have their own supernatural flame, which is projected from each individual, though it seems that the Legion can together cause great immolation when they combine this ability, as we see in the upper level of the Great Librarium of Mnemosyne. This, paired with the palpable wave of dread exuded by them, means the enemy is often on the back foot, confused and even frightened before the first shot is even fired. As the conflict gains more traction and the Marines bear closer upon their enemy, it seems this fear is only enhanced until it's crippling in its effect, causing those who should be immune to terror to turn tail and run for their lives, or rather their souls. Some legionaries do wield chainswords, such as Sergeant Centurius, and others throughout the stories, though these are said to rev silently, rather than the guttural whine of more corporeal chain weapons. When the Legion of the Damned were represented by models upon the tabletop, though the range was limited, the standard tactical marines were armed with an array of weapons, such as bolt guns, flamers, and a heavy bolter. Ultimately, the Legion's fierce toughness and mystical nature seems to protect them from the majority of harm, allowing them to close with their enemy and slay them up close. Within the story The Dark Hollows of Memory, traitor Marine forces empty entire bolter magazines into only 2 oncoming legionaries, though their stride is not even waylaid by the mass reactive shells. To the traitors arrayed before them, it was as if the explosive rounds were simply absorbed by the flames engulfing the Legion of the Damned. A second instance of grievous injury against a Legion brother saw a chainsword buried in his side, though during this one-on-one combat, the legionary merely seemed curious before batting aside his attacker, though red fire did apparently seem to bleed from the wound. These passages prove how resistant to conventional weapons the Legion can be, though this is not always the case. There are many interesting scattered mentions of lore we learn about the Legion, as well as many questions that at this point in time have no specific answer. Firstly, and probably the most controversial point I'll make during this video, but could the Legion have something to do with the 2 missing Primarchs and their legions? They do refer to themselves as a legion after all, and they also seem to be commanded by some greater consciousness than a mere Astartes. Make sure you leave a comment telling me if you think that's plausible or not. It also seems instances of happenstance are wrought throughout the Legion's history and actions. For instance, within the story Ship of the Damned, a pilgrim vessel is loaded with hundreds of pilgrims making the slow voyage to Terra, one which will never be completed in their lifetimes, given that pilgrim vessels lack the ability to traverse the warp. Having recently picked up civilians from a world besieged by some unmentioned terror, a boy comes into possession of a small black sphere, which he says was dropped by a black armoured space marine during the war on his home world. The pilgrim vessel later becomes infested by plague zombies after answering what the crew believed to be a distress call, but is later discovered to be a warning to keep away. The young boy and his sister Dialogus are cornered on board by a horde of plague zombies. There is no way to escape. With 1 round left in her auto pistol, the sister makes ready to execute the boy, saving him at least the agony of being eaten alive. However, as she presses the muzzle of the pistol to the boy's forehead, the black orb within the pocket of her garments burns with such fierce intensity she has to remove it. As she does so, it becomes cold to the touch and appears to be gilded with an ancient text the sister actually does understand, though it is painfully bright to look upon. It purveys a sense of knowing what to do next, and so twisting the sphere at some invisible seam, she then drops the now glowing blue orb to the ground between herself and the horde. As the undead bear down upon the sister and the boy, the lights around the pair go out. The smell of ozone permeates the chamber, and the sister's hair is stood on end, charged with static. The telltale flash of teleportation appears as a squad of legionaries materialise, interjecting themselves between the undead and their 2 waiting morsels. As one bolters discharge, the noise incredibly loud within the metallic confines of the pilgrim vessel. 1 marine stayed behind, retrieving the orb from the sister before, within the space of only a few minutes, the Legion sweep the entire ship of plague zombies, blinking from level to level, making short work of the undead before once more disappearing. At last, once order is restored, and as the sister lays upon her bedroll within her sparse quarters, something hard is underneath her temple. Sitting up straight, she reaches under her pillow to find the smooth, black orb, cold to the touch. What's your opinion on this one, guys? Do you think the Legion materialised just as the sister Dialogus was preparing to execute the child because he is destined for something greater? The legionary upon the boy's homeworld obviously dropped the sphere knowing the events yet to come, which is extremely interesting and implies the Legion do operate in a way that attempts to change the future. Perhaps one day the child will become a great religious figure, or even an Astartes destined to join the Legion. That would mean a certain level of prognostication is held by the Legion, but then again, maybe this is something already confirmed, given how they flit from battlefield to battlefield. However, given the orb is returned to the sister, perhaps it is she destined to do something great. One thing I will mention though, is one of the orphans present within the story, a young girl, is named Ephrael. Whether this is a coincidence or is a nod towards Ephrael Stern, who can say? Another instance of the Legion's interference resulting in a later coincidental outcome was the aid they gave to the Excoriators chapter in defense of the cemetery world of Syrtis Minor. This particular war was surrounded by exceptional circumstances from the very beginning. A disgraced Space Marine captain commanded half a company of his brothers and a regiment of local Sertusian Charnel Guard in defiance of Khorne's Blood Crusade, which in itself contained hordes of bloodletters, rabid cultists, and even Khorne berserkers. There would be no aid for the Loyalists, with their fellow excoriators beset by strange warp currents en route to help, whilst nearby reinforcements from other Loyalist forces, such as the Grey Knights, refused the excoriators' calls for aid, fearing a defeat on Syrtis Minor would rob the system of valuable forces to defend any attacks against Terra or its valuable shrine worlds. The Legion of the Damned would appear during the latter stages of the conflict when all hope seemed lost. Though the brave excoriators would die almost to a man in their valiant defense of the Ecclesiarchy Cemetery world, the captain named Zachariah Kirsch will go on to become chapter master of the excoriators. It is difficult to say within both these stories whether the Legion of the Damned show up to defend the pilgrim ship and cemetery world, knowing full well how zealous the Legion is, or whether their appearance was according to some prognostication which saw the individuals they saved achieving greatness in the name of the Emperor and the Imperium. Interestingly, for all their hard-hitting assaults, the only vehicle ever mentioned to be in the service of the Legion is a void ship which may or may not be previously owned by the Firehawks chapter. Of course, we know now that the Legion are drawn from different Astartes chapter in one way or another, whether that is to serve or some other more sinister means, so this may be the case for the void ship Raptorus Rex. One thing which truly perplexes me within the Legion of the Damned is what the other souls they collect are used for. As we saw after Captain Orisses willingly gave over his soul in service to the Legion, the rest of his brothers were taken by force, with Centurius stating to the Techmarine Marco, "Indeed, your captain would have given his life selflessly and unconditionally in the service of the Emperor, but your sacrifice was hollow, expected, commanded, for that your soul is forfeit." He also then states, "Not for you, the immortal servitude of the Legion. You will pay what is owed." But what do the purpose of these other souls serve if they are not to serve within the Legion? Or do they serve but in a hollow, almost zombie-like state, whilst those who give themselves willingly become like Centurius, or the brother we saw wounded by the Chaos Lord of the Company of Misery? One parallel we could draw with this collection of souls is the Emperor himself. That's some more food for thought. Whilst no answer yet exists, I do hope this seemingly core aspect to the Legion's existence is explored further soon. I'd love to make a video on it for you guys. There were 2 points in the story concerning the Glandhound that rather confused me also. The careful, almost affectionate care the Legion showed for the Imperial Fist reliquary, and the fact they wanted the Imperial Fist progenoid glands the 3 hounds had taken. It's strange they wouldn't stop the Glandhounds from downing the Imperial Fists who were serving to repel the invaders of the Shrine City, but they then also wanted their genetic material. Do the Legion of the Damned have other more conventional ways to create battle brothers, I wonder? The thing which came to my mind when reading about the affection they showed the Scrimshaw Fist from the Imperial Fist reliquary was something akin to the original Pirates of the Caribbean movie, where the undead crew of the Black Pearl are solely hunting down all pieces of gold from the treasure which cursed them. Part of me wonders if there is a similar subplot within the Legion, but in regards to either a sin they have committed in years past, or their own mortal remains. What should be known about the Legion of the Damned is that all information regarding their lore is drawn from a collection of short stories, cameos in wider conflicts, and one novel where they appear as second to the main protagonist, Space Marine chapter. The most condensed single publication regarding these etheric beings is a collection of short stories called Flame and Damnation, which was published in 2016, before the Cicatrix Maledictum, the introduction of Primaris Marines, or the return of Hrvoje Guilliman. You can tell then that we as a community lack a firm, up-to-date base knowledge of lore regarding this most mysterious of chapters, if you can call them that. Thus, when analysing how they could be reintroduced back into the setting at large, or even upon the tabletop once more, we are perhaps better off viewing how other factions within 40k have been introduced most recently. The most recent of these would of course be the Leagues of Votann, but also the Adeptus Custodes and Genestealer cults. The squats actually have a fair bit in common with the current status of the Legion. They used to be playable models before being taken away from the tabletop, and they were a firm, if not unique, facet of the lore, again before being removed from the vast narrative constructed since then. Of course, we could similarly compare the introduction of Genestealer cults, Adeptus Custodes, or god-specific chaos subfactions as well. So the main parameters or questions I feel we need to ask ourselves is what would need to be adjusted or retconned to add the Legion into the setting as a main subfaction to the Imperium, in the same vein as Grey Knights or Deathwatch are, that is more an independent Space Marine subfaction, and how would their reintroduction or greater lore expanding influence the current setting? Before we dive into these points, comment below if there's any others you believe would need to be addressed regarding inserting the Legion into the setting as a larger, more influential player than they have been up to now. And if they did, would you collect them on the tabletop? Now, whilst the opportunities for long-dead independent characters such as Captain Tycho or Nasir Amit to be reincarnated is very exciting, how this army would function on the tabletop and in the wider ongoing conflicts of Era Indomitus requires a bit of discussion. Let's stick to our parameters to ensure we stay on course, hard as that's going to be. Firstly, when it comes to adding the Legion of the Damned back into the wider 40k setting, I personally don't believe there needs to be much, if any, retcon. It's already established that their aid is extremely rare, and to date they haven't been deeply explored as a faction, meaning they're a blank slate to play with for authors and rule designers alike. Just like the Grey Knights, now that the galaxy is haunted by the demonic and unjust on such an unprecedented scale, any aid the Legion of the Damned can offer would make a tremendous impact on the last Imperial bastions of hope. I imagine there's a lot of stranded planets within Nihilus that would of course benefit. But apart from their general existence or explaining their wider operations, there could even be an opportunity to work the Legion of the Damned into the current subplot of the Emperor's possible return. Whilst a clear "the Emperor controls them" narrative would prove quite underwhelming, a chance to at least mingle them with the Emperor's divinity or afterlife in general is present. It would be far more interesting if the force at work behind the Legion of the Damned was kept vague, while simultaneously sharing their motives, how they operate internally, as well as a deeper dive into the individual Marine's nature. A ghostly legion of slain heroes who are determined to steer humanity towards the brightest future in line with Imperial dogma, claiming worthy souls on the way, is far more interesting in my opinion than a Space Marine chapter simply dispatched by the Emperor. That would also set them at odds with the likes of Hrvoje and the Lion, who of course know the Emperor is not a god. There are several factions introduced in recent years who had deep, pre-existing lore, such as the Genestealer cults in 2016 and the Adeptus Custodes in 2018, than the most recent Leagues of Votann in 2022, the latter even gaining a name change from squats. Considering how different all these factions are from one another, how each has had their lore expanded immensely from what it was prior, both in regards to their general operation as well as what they're doing in the current era, I don't believe it would be difficult to place the Legion within the current setting. In fact, their aloof nature means there are lots of ways they can be implemented. Just because there exist stories about the Legion of the Damned defending holy sites, seeking particular holy items, or even progenoid glands, doesn't mean all those loose ends need to be addressed immediately, not even the story of their origin. I for one do enjoy when the stories released by Black Library build up a mystery which is never fully uncovered. It leaves more to the imagination of the reader, and also for the hobbyist who wants to put their own personal touch to their models, while staying true to the lore, as there exists no definite which confines what can be built. What do you think though? You know how much I enjoy chatting with you guys. Do you think we'll see the Legion on the tabletop anytime soon? Now guys, if you're looking to buy models or hobby supplies for Christmas, then Gap Games have you covered with 21% off 40k. You don't need to enter in a special code or anything like that, it's simply the discount that Brett and his team provide. If you check out the site via the link in the description, then it will automatically let the team know you visited through Titan Wargaming, and will entitle the channel to a percentage of any web sales. It's an excellent way to support a local business and Titan Wargaming. So thank you for your consideration. We're trying to build the community out to 8k by Christmas, so if you found this entertaining or learnt something new, bash that sub and notification button guys. As you know, I've also created a Patreon recently, as I feel it's a great way to take a step back from the 6 to 4 and enable me to make more content throughout the week. Feel free to check out the link in the description so you can see what comes with each tier. I did a lot of research into what people in the community offer, and personally I feel there's great value in what's there. I really hope you got some joy and inspiration out of the video. Until next week, take it easy and have a good one.